A relationship between partners could be sparked by song or the chemistry created in dance. Perhaps it's through a meaningful gift that represents the knowledge of what your significant other needs and wants. Maybe deep down, it's driven by the fulfillment one feels through friendship and long lasting bonds. For many, it's also compelled by lust, a near overwhelming urge to secure a mate and reproduce. Now, this might sound like a bad lead in for a romance novel, but it's certainly no work of fiction. Through their courtship efforts, birds, our conspicuous feathered neighbors, offer us the opportunity to witness many examples of the triumphs, failures, and competition that drive reproductive success in wild animals. Hi, everyone. This is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with explore.org. Spring is the season when the landscape wakes from its winter dormancy. And for many wild animals, it is no time to waste. For birds, the business of securing a mate and raising young is hard work. So during today's broadcast, we'll explore bird life through the lens of courtship. We'll discuss courtship in bald eagles with Amy Ries from the Raptor Resource Project. Then I'll talk to Dr. Pat Deibert from the Sagebrush Ecosystem Science Center, and she's a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll look at the combat between male sage grouse in their attempts to impress some very discriminating females. And finally, I'll highlight and explore the fascinating and aerobatic displays of hummingbirds. It's a form of aerial dance designed to impress the opposite sex. If you have questions along the way about bird courtship, I'll do my best to try to answer those for you, so you can drop those in the chat. You can find that below the live camera feed on explore.org. So just scroll down just a little bit farther down below the page where you're watching me right now. Drop those questions in there, and one of the helpful moderators from explore.org will be sending those my way, and I'll do my best to try to answer those as we continue along during the broadcast. But first, let's enjoy a short video of some examples of bird courtship that we have captured on our live cams. While courtship in birds takes many forms, it's often difficult to witness, or it's simply overlooked. For example, if we were to consider looks alone, then the focused gaze of a bald eagle appears to really give it a hardened attitude. Through this lens, though, we risk missing their true nature. Bald eagles are complicated critters, and they very much have a softer side, especially when it comes to courtship and raising a family. And we're currently in the midst of eagle nesting season on explore.org, and it nests across much of North America and the contiguous United States. Parent eagles are busy incubating eggs or tending to the first chicks of the year. Raising young is only part of a longer reproductive process for eagles. So let's back the story up just a bit to talk about how they form pair bonds and select mates. To discuss courtship among bald eagles, from their initial flirtations when seeking mates to the efforts of long bonded eagle pairs to rekindle the romance after many years together, I spoke with Amy Ries from the Raptor Resource Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and strengthening raptor populations, expanding participation in raptor conservation, and educating people around the world about raptors and their habitats. Bald eagles, as many of us know, and especially you since you've been studying bald eagles for a long time, they're long-lived animals. They're generally monogamous as well, and partners are carefully chosen. But can you tell us about their initial courtship process? What is that like?
So it varies a little bit between maybe a pair that's new or a pair that's an eagle that's recruiting a new mate versus an established pair. And an established pair like the Decorah and Decorah North eagles, the eagles are on territory all year long. But you'll see sort of a cessation of activities in the fall. It's why we do nest work in September. So maybe November, October, courtship starts ramping up. They start bringing sticks into the nest, working on the nest together. The male will bring food to the female, and you'll see activity starting to happen in and around the nest. As activity ramps up, you'll see them working side by side, getting closer together, maybe brushing up against one another or footing up or footing one another. You'll see them vocalizing together. So you'll see this ramp up of activity that culminates in mating or copulating.
And what about younger birds? So if you are in like a newly matured eagle, you got your adult plumage, how are you going to try to find a mate, and what sort of process are you going through?
We saw a pretty good example of that a couple days ago in Decorah, although mom didn't accept this new eagle's advances. So he lands on the nest. He starts fiddling around with it. There's a nest, right? So there's probably an eagle around here somewhere that might be receptive. When she landed on the nest, you saw him tilt forward and sort of drop his wings a little bit and give her side eye instead of a frontal face challenge. So he was basically saying, I'm receptive and find you kind of interesting. If she had accepted it instead of kicking him off the nest, he would have started bringing in nesting materials and bringing in fish and other favorite foods for her, and you would have seen that ramp up. He might have been a little bit clumsy in his first year. We often see that too, but you would have seen again the sort of ramp up activity, but she would have had to accept his interest, and she did not.
And I've also read about sort of a nuptial flight that uh, courting eagles will undergo, where they will spiral in the air, sort of lock talons in a cartwheel. Uh, so how does that process maybe help eagles assess their prospective partners?
This is super interesting for a couple of reasons. The nuptial flight was well described in, I think, The Monarch of the Forest, but it turns out that while that happens between courting and mated pairs, it also happens between unrelated pairs, and it can be either a courtship activity or it can be an antagonistic activity, or in some cases, it appears to be a play activity. So when eagles that are mated doing it, it's been described as a mate test. I myself don't really know that it is, because I feel like the true mate test is bringing in and surrendering your food, right? But we do see them do it, and mated pairs seem to enjoy it. So they'll lock talons, they'll cartwheel around one another, and at some point they'll break their grasp. And that's actually harder to do maybe than locking talons in the first place, because an eagle's talons ratchet shut really easily. It takes work for them to open up, right? So to me, that's actually the most interesting part, is they do this incredible spiral that they don't unlock, and sometimes they don't. They end up on the ground. So mated pairs have to lock and then unlock, and then they'll maybe go up and do it again because, among other things, at risk of sounding anthropomorphic, it appears to be fun for them.
And is that is that nuptial flight, those cartwheel flights, practiced by juvenile birds, or is it something strictly that you see adults do?
We also see it, I'm not going to say juvenile, so first year birds. I can't speak to that. We absolutely see it in
Okay.
subadults. And we'll see subadults cartwheel together. We'll see subadults cartwheel with adults, and we'll see adults cartwheel together as well. So it's this kind of interesting behavior that seems to be instinctual in eagles, but again, they sort of repurpose for all kinds of reasons.
And you spoke a little bit earlier about how eagles may or may not spend, the entire year together. In Decorah, where you're watching your nests right now, eagles are in that territory year round. Uh, but bonded eagle pairs, if they are more migratory and they depart for the year, they're not spending a lot of time together. When those eagles come back to their nesting territory, are they going to be experiencing sort of like the same courtship behavior of bringing, uh, nesting material back, and sort of what you've nicknamed nestoration, and going through that part of the process?
Right. So eagles are super interesting to me because they kind of do, I want to say, an entire human reproductive cycle every year, right? So as days start to lengthen, their gonads, which are normally small, begin to swell. Sex hormones start coursing through their body. And this happens both in bonded pairs that stay together all year long and in pairs that migrate. So they have testosterone is going and estrogen is going as they begin to lay eggs. Prolactin is going. So you have all this super interesting behavior that's regulated by hormones. Eventually their gonads shrink. And then you see all these parenting behaviors. And then the young take off, right? They empty nest. And they sort of gonad senescence before the whole thing starts up again the next year. So a lot of the behaviors are similar, regardless, of whether the eagles are an established pair on site year round or a migratory pair, and they're really regulated by daylight length.
And we've been able to see, I think, some pretty interesting behaviors through webcams in the Decorah nests and other nests across North America. Cameras on nesting raptors are becoming more and more common, and I think that's actually been a really great thing. So my last question for you is, what have we learned from maybe webcam observations that we previously didn't know or perhaps misunderstood about eagle courtship and pair bonds?
We have learned so much. Oh my God. So when we started this in 2011, everybody knew that eagles were only monogamous. And in fact, eagles are mostly monogamous, and they don't really appear to engage in extra pair copulation, aka cheating. However, we have seen eagle divorce. We've seen polygyny. The trio pair, for example, is 2 males and a female. We've seen, polyandry. We've seen polygyny, 2 females and a male. We've seen kind of all of these really interesting behaviors and gained an understanding, I would say, that eagles, while they don't think like humans, they do have an internal and emotional life. They have preferences in partners. They have preferences in bonding. Mom on top, for example, something we used to see a lot of the Decorah nest, was very surprising to some of the eagle researchers I know. And these are people who have been studying eagles in the wild for years. So it gave us sort of a whole another look at their internal lives and their preferences, and made us aware of the nuances around eagle behavior, things that we really couldn't see without being able to look into these nests with a camera.
Well, quite fascinating. Amy, thanks so much for joining me today and illuminating the world of eagle courtship for our audience.
Thank you to Explore for all you do to educate people and make them aware of animals and wildlife around the world.
That was Amy Ries from the Raptor Resource Project. Please visit their website at raptorresource.org. It contains a fantastic amount of information on bald eagles and other raptors. And honestly, when I'm looking for information on a behavior that I saw maybe on one of our eagle cameras, that's one of the first places that'll go. It has some really great information on it. And you can also watch nesting bald eagles by visiting explore.org/eagles. We did have a question that was related to bald eagles that came in while I was interviewing Amy Ries. And this question is related to some of the things that she actually was talking about. We were asked, what effect does the loss of eagles have on bald eagle pairs? Do they feel a sense of loss? And, you know, it's difficult to say. There was I think the nest that we have a camera on Catalina Island lost its eggs recently to a pair of ravens, and ravens love eggs. That's one of the, they will fly around seeking eggs, and they'll eat pretty much anything that they can. So they're very opportunistic birds. And that nest, the pairs of eagles were temporarily not on the nest, and the raven saw the opportunity, came and depredated the nest. It had 3 eggs in it now, so it led to the complete loss of all of those eggs. And the eagles came back basically to an empty nest, and we saw a little bit of them for checking the nest out, sitting there. From a hormonal standpoint, as Amy said, their sex hormones are tied to daylight, so that's an important consideration whether they're going to be able to re-nest or not. It maybe depends on how early in the season is. It depends on whether or not there's enough time and where they are in that sex hormone cycle. But Amy also mentioned how these birds do have sort of an emotional life, and we're finding that that is a common occurrence among wildlife. Humans certainly do not have a monopoly on emotions and feelings. So what they're actually experiencing there during that time, though, I think is still very much up to debate. It's one of those questions we would have to ask the eagles themselves, and we can't, of course, we can't communicate with them, unfortunately. But since, in humans, loss is such a strong emotion, I bet that is shared with so many of our wild brethren as well. So if they are, raising young or on a nest, they're probably not experiencing a sense of loss like we do. Maybe they're not conceptualizing it like we do, but they might feel something. And I'm certainly not going to deny that possibility. So it's a tough question to answer what actually happens to them. But, you can go along the biological lines of it. You can also go along the emotional lines of it, and it probably affects them maybe in both ways. And while the bald eagle courtship, continues between eagles in various forms across many years, other birds, they don't form long-term pair bonds. Some species, like many of North America's spring and summer songbirds, they form pair bonds only for the duration of the nesting season. And still other species, the contact between males and females is even more ephemeral. In those instances, the choosiness of the female bird can drive intense competition between males. And this brings us to another example of bird courtship. This method of courtship requires a lot of coordination. It requires endurance. It requires precision, and it requires some good looks. In the sagebrush plains of the western US, male sage grouse participate in a competitive battle. The courtship efforts of male sage grouse provide a quintessential example of an animal in which the phrase strut your stuff is not a metaphor. On the strutting grounds, sage grouse experience a form of ritualized and sometimes actualized combat for the opportunity to reproduce. It's an exhaustive effort that the birds must accomplish if they are to gain the favor of their female counterparts. To explore the courting behavior of sage grouse, I spoke with Dr. Pat Deibert, the sagebrush ecosystem science coordinator and a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Pat, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Sage grouse have, I think, a fascinating courtship process, and they utilize a bit of an arena, so to speak, for that activity and that behavior. So, what is a lek, and how is it utilized by sage grouse?
So a lek is actually a derivation of, I believe, a Swedish word which means an area to play. And a lek is basically a gathering spot in sagebrush where males will gather in the spring, go through their elaborate courtship display to attract the attention of females. They are very traditional. Typically, a lek will be persistent for can be up to 100 years. They move a little bit in location, but they tend to persist and be a common place to find a mate in the spring.
And how do male sage grouse claim and defend territories on the lek?
So the males arrive much earlier than the females or than the hens, and they find a spot that they think is just going to be the best spot to attract the hen. We really don't know the dynamics of exactly what makes a spot so good, but they will start defending territories once they claim this spot, and they become very protective of those areas. You'll often see on leks several fights if another male gets too close. And it's very frequent to see adult males chase off juvenile males who get a little bold and try to come in and take over the turf. But it's just an area that in their head is important.
And once the females arrive, I mean, a lot of the dancing begins in earnest. So can you walk us through the sage grouse dance? What are the steps in it, and how does it work?
So it starts with the male inflating air sacs, so they're actually off of the esophagus, not the lungs. And so they swallow a great deal of air. They'll inflate the air sacs. They have feathers that come up and over their head, which apparently is very attractive. And they will then rub their wings against these very stiff feathers against their air sacs. And it makes this kind of whistling noise as the male inflates and pops the air sacs. It actually makes a popping noise that I guess is very sexy. They do that twice, and then the air sacs will deflate. In the meantime, too, their tail is fully spread to show their beautiful tail feathers. They give a little burp when they deflate, probably to get rid of the residual air, and they'll turn right around and do it again. And they'll do it as often as they can attract a female to them. And a lot of times we know that there are females on the lek because the males will suddenly start displaying. They turn in little circles to do this. They try to face the female so that she can see just how attractive he really is. But the popping of the air sacs is a pretty iconic symbol of sage grouse. Very cool sound if you've never heard it.
And of course, they're doing this for the females. Female sage grouse seem to be exceptionally demanding critics. What are they looking for in the males when they're watching this dance?
That's a great question that we really haven't figured out yet. Spent a lot of time researching that. But they're looking for what we think the quality of their dance, and only they can tell us what makes it a quality dance. We have found that persistence on the lek, a female sometimes will take 3 to 4 to 5 days to decide which male she wants to mate with. And so if you're not there every day, your chances of being the selected male go right down the tubes. We don't know if it's, they look at the symmetry of the tail feathers. That seems to be an indicator. I think that the dance and the physical appearance of the bird provide a index to the bird's health. In one study that I was involved in, birds carry lice, and if lice will adhere onto a male's sac when he's inflating and popping them out so they don't get thrown off. Little red marks. That might be an indicator to a female that that's not a good male to mate with, because she does want to take those lice then to her nest where they could threaten her offspring. So it's just, we think general health of the male, the rate of the display, and the quality of the display, and you've got to ask the hen what it is about the display she likes the most.
And in sage grouse, how big might that reproductive payoff be for the most successful males? I've read that not all males on the lek are actually reproductively successful. A lot of times it's just a few of them.
That's absolutely correct. We have males that typically secure 90% of the copulations on a lek. And for that male, getting that genetic information into the next generation is huge. Males only live, typically males who breed successfully only live about 3 to 4 years. And in the first year they're out there, it takes a while for them to develop the credibility. Juvenile males typically are not very successful. But if they can get their genes into that next generation, then their effort is not lost. Being on a lek is a very dangerous thing for a male to do. So it's a very high cost because predators figure out where they are. But if they can get those genes into that generation, then that's carried on for the next several generations.
And as we consider, the best ways to conserve sage grouse habitat, how important is it that we protect these lekking areas?
So a lek is typically located where you have really good nesting habitat for females. And you've got to protect the females on their nests from disturbance. So protecting a lek, because we know where they are, has been the easy target for habitat protection. But what you're really doing is you're protecting the nesting habitat around that lek. And that is why you will see buffers around lek, recommendations to protect 2 to 4 miles out from a lek. And what you're doing is you're protecting the nesting habitat. If for some reason the nesting habitat isn't there, your lek's going to go away. So it's very important to conserve the lek, number one, from disturbance, but more important to conserve the surrounding nesting habitat so the females can pull off their clutch.
And you've been involved in sage grouse conservation for many years. So what's kept you inspired and interested in the study of sage grouse?
You only have to go out to a lek and see the magic that occurs there. It gets in your blood. Being on the lek, smelling the sagebrush at sunrise, watching this dance that has happened for centuries is truly amazing. And it's what keeps me going every year.
Well, Pat, thanks so much for joining me today. A fascinating conversation on
Okay.
these amazing birds.
Thank you. Come out and see a lek sometime. I'd be happy to show you.
Thanks again to Dr. Pat Deibert from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for her insight. You can learn more about sage grouse and the efforts to conserve their habitat at fws.gov/greater sage grouse. And check out the LECCam, which just came online again on explore.org during the last few days. You can find it at explore.org/grouse. The best time to watch is anywhere between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. Pacific time. There were birds on it this morning right before sunrise. It's located in Central Oregon, so kind of time your bird watching based on that information. It's really fun to watch, and I'm actually quite glad that that humans aren't subjected to the same maybe demands that male sage grouse are to secure partners, because I think my family line may have died out a long time ago. And I know my dad's not watching right now, so I can say that. We did have a couple of questions that came in about sage grouse just a moment ago. One person was wondering, what is the reason why their habitat has dwindled by almost half? And from what I've read, that really just has to do with habitat alteration and land use changes brought upon by humans throughout their habitat. The sagebrush plains, for a long time, for decades, were really considered to be kind of like a waste area. It wasn't good habitat for much of anything else except the converting to some other use. So much of it was converted into croplands, for example, or maybe it was overgrazed through ranching. But I know now the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, and a lot of partners are working with landowners to try to preserve these lekking areas, as Dr. Deibert was speaking about. And I'll answer this question too. Dr. Deibert did answer this, I think, in the chat, but just in case you happen to miss it, somebody was wondering how many years do males typically have on a lek, and how many chances does he have to be the top male? She mentioned in there that they really only have a lifespan of 3 to 4 years. So their window of opportunity is really, really short. And it was interesting that she did talk about how the juvenile males, maybe those first year birds, just don't have much of a success. So you can kind of like throw out the first year. That's not good enough for them. It's because they don't have the skills or maybe the endurance at that time. So maybe they just have a couple of years after that, 3 perhaps at the most. So it's a very short window for them to find reproductive success. And they're fascinating creatures overall. And it is on my bucket list to try to get out to a spot where I can view a lek in person. And it's really fun to watch the LECCam if you haven't had that opportunity yet. Before we conclude the broadcast today, we're coming up on the end of it right now. There's one more example of bird courtship that I want to explore. Like sage grouse, this is an example of bird courtship that's driven by female choosiness. It's a process that you might be able to witness in your backyard if you have flowers or a feeder that attracts hummingbirds. Although hummingbirds are tiny, they are also some of the world's most remarkable athletes. Hummingbirds are willing and able to push their bodies to the limit, especially in the attempt to secure mating opportunities. Within North American bee hummingbirds, a group that includes familiar species such as the Allens, black-chinned, ruby-throated, and rufous, among others, males do not provide parental care. His reproductive success, therefore, is determined by the number of offspring he can sire. But securing a mating opportunity is no easy task. A male must show off his flying and acoustic abilities, as well as his appearance, all in a precise manner before the female will select him. Let's take a look at this behavior in the Allen's hummingbird, a common species that breeds in coastal California and southwest Oregon. After securing a feeding territory, a male Allen's hummingbird waits for a female to arrive in his arena. Once she does, that begins his chance to impress. While facing the female, the male Allen's moves in a rapid back and forth shuttle display, during which he flashes his brightly colored throat feathers, spreads his tail feathers, and trills with his wings. He'll repeat this motion several times, then climb as high as 100 feet in the air for his second act. With his love interest waiting below, he stoops into a powered J-shaped dive that ends with a mechanical ripping sound as he passes within a few feet of the female. During his powered dive, he may accelerate to more than 55 miles per hour. When he pulls out of the dive, his pectoral muscles can be supporting as much as 10 times his body weight. Female hummingbirds evaluate the athletic performance, but also seem to require more from their suitors than just physical prowess. They also consider the quality of his feather colors and the sound he makes. The sound is mechanical, generated by the fluttering of his tail and wing feathers. In this manner, the feathers serve as an acoustic organ, but the flutter also increases drag. It makes his flight more difficult and less efficient. During hummingbird courtship, efficiency isn't the endgame. The choosiness of female hummingbirds drives the behavior of courting males. The result is a tremendous display of power, strength, and agility. This time of the year is one of the most exciting times to watch birds throughout North America. And I can't wait for the hummingbirds to return to my area so I can get to see the ruby-throated hummingbirds buzzing around my yard. They're some of the most remarkable birds I think that I can witness. So I encourage you to get a feeder or plant some, even better, plant some native flowers that attract hummingbirds. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And look carefully for other methods of courtship in birds. Birds are pretty conspicuous animals, so you just have to maybe take some time and pay attention to their behavior, and you might be able to see some really fascinating behaviors. Their courtship methods offer us the opportunity to witness many examples of the triumphs, the failures, and the competition that drive reproductive success among those animals. Thanks for joining me today. We have a lot more in store for you about birds here on explore.org, because coming up next week is Bird Week on TikTok, and that begins March 29. We'll be hosting several live Q&As on TikTok, so please join us there and follow our social media channels for more information on those times and dates. My name is Mike Fitz. Have a great day, everyone. And remember, as we like to say at explore.org, never stop learning.